again to the Party of One podcast, the actual play RPG podcast where the gaming table is always set for two. I'm your host as always, Jeff Stormer, and this week on the show, I am joined by Randy Lubin for a game of Working the Case. Working the Case is a super quick collaborative mystery game. Players take on the role of investigators uncovering evidence, understanding the suspects, and discovering the culprit of a crime, a mystery. It captures that really cool, fun whodunit vibe. I love the way that it sort of peels back mysteries one by one. You sort of piece together which pieces are red herrings and who the true culprit is. It's like really cool and satisfying, and we told a really like wonderful, satisfying story in not very much time at all. I think the final episode length is like 45 minutes with intro and outro. It is such a blast. I love it. It's really, really fun. You should check it out. The game is currently available in draft form, playable via playingcards.io. For more information, you can head to Randy's website. That's diegeticgames.com/workingthecase, or you can head to the show notes for more information. Randy is an inspiration for one thing, but more specifically, Randy is a game designer and a developer of games and systems, and he is a game designer at Diegetic Games. You can find his work there. You can also check out the work that he has done developing StorySynth, which is an online games platform that was originally developed to facilitate and run prompt-based world-building games a la For the Queen, but has grown and evolved into this really exciting and cool space for playing story games online and sort of like playing these sort of generative storytelling games via the internet. I am blown away by StorySynth as a platform. It has done so much cool things, and seeing it grow and evolve into what it is now is like astoundingly cool, right? Like, the way that it is creator friendly, it is easy to build games in it, the way that it facilitates and has options that allow for creators to get paid for their work. It is, it's all built via Google Docs and Sheets, so it's very easy for creators to manage, and like it creates these really seamless and fun play experiences that can do a lot of neat and interesting and wild and weird and cool things. Like, Anyone Can Wear the Mask is likely to be on there at some point because it does almost all of the things that you would need for an Anyone Can Wear the Mask game. I love StorySynth. I think it is unbelievably cool. And you should check that out at storysynth.org. A link to that is also in the show notes. And finally, before we dive in, an ad. I want to tell you about a show I think you'll enjoy. Play on Podcasts. Epic audio adventures that reimagine Shakespeare's timeless tales, featuring original music composition and the voices of award-winning actors. Each episode explores plays from Macbeth to A Midsummer Night's Dream in a way that you can actually understand it, and created specifically for the podcast form by some of America's most exciting playwrights, directors, and composers, and performed by Stage and Screen's best. Hear Shakespeare like you've never heard before. Subscribe to Play on Podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. And with all that said, let's go ahead and throw it over to me in the past so that he can get started with the show. Take it past me. Thanks, future me. This week, I am so excited to be sitting down with my friend Randy Lubin. Randy, thank you so much for coming on Party of One.
Jeff, it's great to be on the show.
I am so excited to have you on the show. This is going to be a wonderful game. I'm really excited. And why don't you take a moment right at the top to let our lovely listeners at home know about what you've got going on you might want them to know about, as well as what we are playing this week.
Thanks. Yeah, today we are going to be playing Working the Case. It's a working title at the moment, but we're going to be telling a murder mystery story where we play as the investigators, narrowing down a list of suspects and doing a little bit of world building as we figure out who the culprit was and if they're brought to justice. And this is part of a broader system that'll end up being SRD that anyone can hack and remix. So stay tuned. If you like this and then you're inspired to make your own murder mysteries or other similar format games, there will be news of that sometime in the future. Beyond that, my name is Randy Lubin. I'm a game designer. I make serious games to help organizations explore the future and fun and silly world building games. You can find all my work at diegeticgames.com. I also am the designer behind StorySynth, which is a free and open source website that lets you very easily enter prompts into a Google Sheet and have that auto-compile into a game that you can play in real time with friends in your browser. Games in a variety of formats, but inspired by other games such as For the Queen, The Quiet Year, and there's a bunch of other formats as well. So you can find that at storysynth.org.
StorySynth is so sick. Like, for real, Like, just taking a moment to acknowledge when a thing is absolutely fucking mind-blowing and world-changing, story synth is, like, next level incredible.
Oh, thanks,
Like,
Jeff.
like, it needs to be stated outright that, like, it is one of those things that when I go in and I play around with it, I'm like, oh, this is what playing games online can feel like. Oh, suddenly everything makes sense.
And hopefully not just playing games, but designing games. My goal with it is to like just take all the friction out of going from idea to it first playable prototype, and to really just make it be about like coming up with quick prompts and getting them in there and then being able to play and see what works.
It's sick. It's so incredible. So I am excited to work the case today. I am. I don't know if this is. I feel like this is probably known that I am an absolute goddamn sucker for detective fiction, but I'm excited to flex my Columbo muscles today and build out a case and work out some suspects. So why don't we go ahead and dive right in and talk us through how we're getting started today?
Wonderful. And we're playing this today via playingcards.io, and there's actually a free demo version of this game available, so that and with instructions of how to load it into playingcards.io for anyone who wants to play along. My guess is there'll be a link in the show notes or elsewhere online. But because of that, there's a bit of a graphic element to it in how we play, and I'll try and call it out as we play so that listeners can get a sense of what we're doing. So real quickly, overarching what we're going to do, we're going to quickly talk about the setting, we're going to figure out who the victim is, and then introduce 5 suspects. And over the course of the game, what we're going to do is take turns playing evidence cards that tie to either the motive, means, opportunity, or some other secret that the suspects have, as we as investigators slowly close in on who the culprit was. And as we go, we'll also be eliminating some of those suspects as the potential culprit. And so we're going to do a little bit of setup, and then we're going to get into that core loop of playing evidence cards. I've already designed a few variants of working the case. We're going to be playing the space station version today. And so before we discover who the victim is, we need to decide what type of space station are we talking about. Is this a like pleasure space station that's like a huge resort kind of thing that people fly up to? Is it a like almost derelict research base that's chronically underfunded way out at the fringe? Or is it something completely different? You have any ideas? Anything you're excited about?
So, space resort is immediately interesting to me and fun to me. I've played a lot of games like working in space recently, and the idea of like playing in space is like a fun area to play with, and B, thematically the thing that I want to pull on a little bit, and that I'm interested in chewing on is I mentioned working my Columbo muscles. I like the idea of antagonistic rich assholes is the only way that I can really meaningfully describe it. And so like a space resort for the wealthy and elite where things are going wrong and where like we are going to unravel those things is very appealing to me.
Excellent. I absolutely love it. Let's just dig in right there then. So we have a rough sense of our setting, and let's discover who our victim is. Let's just jump right to it. So I'm going to randomly draw a victim card, and our victim is a scientist of some sort. So I guess the first question is the scientist here on vacation, or are they permanently based on this station? I
think immediately when I see the card, my thought is that they are working on the station, that they are specifically like employed by the station, and so maybe pulling on that thread a little bit. What if they are thinking Jurassic Park? Like, what if they are one of the scientists that are in charge of like making the amenities that make the space resort work?
Totally. There's probably some like super advanced like VR simulation-y hub stuff and some like wild animatronic immersive theater things, and so some kind of scientist who's doing cutting edge like Disney Imagineering style. Imagineer is a good way to put it. That idea of like we are making the thing that makes Westworld. Perfect. Okay, with that decided, let's just describe the crime scene really quickly.
Let's do it.
We need to know what was the location, what was the state of the victim's body, like are there any suspicious markings or anything, and is there a potential murder weapon present? We should not be definitive. So these are just some things to point the investigation in the right direction, but not necessarily to close off there could easily be red herrings or coincidences at this point. So maybe you can each introduce one or two if you want to start.
I'm gonna throw out in terms of like a location, because of all the things that we've been sort of throwing out there. The visual that I get is that this body was found in a theme park like display, like out in the open, not like in an office or in a back room. Like was found like, the like water fountain, the water fountain platform thing where it's like the flat surface that the water spurts out of.
Totally.
I think it's one of those, and there are like displays around it, and that's kind of where like the body was. Somebody stumbled onto the body on this large like water fountain exhibit thing.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense, and I think whoever first stumbled upon it thought it was like the trailhead to like a ARG experience.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
And then turned that like amusement turned to horror when they realized like, oh no, this isn't just good production values. There's been a murder. Okay, cool. I'll add to that, and I'll say it looks like there was a massive trauma to part of the torso by like a massive like compressing force, which easily could have been like an animatronic machine or something.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to add?
There is no signs of a struggle nearby. Like it is curiously pristine apart from this body being here.
Perfect. Okay, I think that's all the details we need to get going. The final thing to decide before we introduce our suspects is to define who we are as investigators. So we could be anything from like members of the community, insurance adjusters, pretty much you name it. We could be in the employ of the company that employs the scientist. Do you have anything that draws you in?
The first thing that jumps so the one thing that pushes that like I want to draw the line in the sand is I don't want to be a cop.
Great.
And I'm trying to think like what would be the most fun like not cop person to investigate this murder would be. You mentioned other scientists, and that like that idea really appeals to me because that presents the really juicy narrative possibility that like no one is officially really looking into this, or if they are, there's such red tape that like that the system has actively written this off, and that we are simply people that need to get the answers.
Totally. So these are like maybe I'll say this as like we were like colleagues / past classmates of the victim, and maybe we came onto the station from nearby. So we were not like none of us could possibly be suspects. We were all like off station when this happened, and we rushed to try and figure it out, get some justice.
I love that.
All right, cool. So and the other thing I'll throw out is that in general the focus of play is going to be on the investigation, not us as investigators.
Right.
But we can totally ham it up and get into it if we want. So I'm going to hit the button now that deals out all the suspects. And each suspect is going to be a combination of the character archetype and the connection they have to the victim. And so I just dealt these out. And each pair of like character and connection is on its own row. And let's just read them aloud real quick. So we have a professor who is the rival to the scientist.
We have a mercenary employee, which is great.
A botanist who is the mentor to the scientist.
We have an engineer who is a relative to the scientist.
And there's a criminal who is the romantic partner, or was the romantic partner of the scientist.
Some juicy. This is great because these are already juicy suspects.
And they imply so much about what the scientist has been up to.
Yeah.
So one thing, and we have a choice. My recommendation is that we just refer to these suspects by their character sort of archetype as opposed to coming up with names. It's enough different characters that I think that's the easiest. And we could just use they, them pronouns to refer to everyone.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we have some suspects, and now we're ready to head into the core part of the game. So, Jeff, what I'm going to ask you to do is draw 5 evidence cards into your hand.
All right. Done.
All right. And so for the folks listening in, these evidence cards all fall into the categories of either motives, means, opportunity, or secret. All of the characters have secrets, even if they're not tied to the murder itself. And so on your turn, what you're going to do is pick one of these cards and play it onto a character. And there's slots to the right of the character, and say, when you play it, say how we as the investigators found that piece of evidence, and give it a little bit of juicy detail. So, what is it that makes this either so damning as evidence or so interesting? And so a couple other key nuances. Every character must get one bit of evidence before anybody gets two. And you can't give anybody two of the same type. So once somebody has a motive, they won't get a second motive.
Got it. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Are you inspired to go first?
Otherwise, I have one immediately that's super standing out to me.
Great.
So the professor was a rival to the science. So the two threads that I'm going to tie together here that stand out to me is that the scientist's mentor was a botanist, which tells me that the scientist was probably working in a similar field in the sort of the biology of the resort, was like engineering, the life and like the bioforms that were making up the luxuries of the park. And we have this professor who is a rival. And so I'm going to drop means of the professor as an AI assistant and say that this professor was, given that they are a professor and not necessarily a scientist, I think they were like a department head. And they were the head of the department that was like overseeing the development of the AI assistant that was like serving the needs of the park and of the resort. And therefore, like, it would be very easy for them to program out something to happen mechanically that would keep their hands free and would look like just a brutal accident happened to the scientist.
Ooh, perfect. How did we discover this?
I think that we discover this by, as we are investigating their sort of what immediately occurred, there are a series of unusual interactions with the AI assistant that the scientist had encountered. And like maybe that chest injury was the result of like a door slamming on them or like a robot arm striking them, and it was done in such a way that like it was following through on an AI command, but like it doesn't quite nothing quite adds up about it, and it points to something being fishy about the AI, and that kind of points us towards this department head as the person overseeing this larger department managing sort of the AI prompts and programming.
Totally makes sense. There's supposed to be safeguards for this. So that sounds spot on. And now that you've played a card, you can draw up another card, so you always have 5 cards in your hand. All right. I am going to... I think this is a pretty easy and natural one. I'm going to say that the mercenary had obligations nearby, and that was their opportunity. So I think we're just starting to get a sense of who was in the area around this fountain area where the body was left. And the mercenary is an interesting character. They're quite a bit older, but they're in a very junior role in the organization. They've set their mercenary ways aside and decided to sort of work their way up and get some experience in designing these really cool leisure experiences here at the vacation station. And so roughly around the time of death, or at least before the body was discovered, the mercenary was kind of going around and checking on, just like doing the somewhat routine, okay, let's just check and make sure all of the like prototypes are still functional, so that when we do some of our playtest equivalent experiences in for some of the new technology that we're starting to roll out across the station, we can make sure it works. So the mercenary had a reason to be very close to where the body was found around that time.
I love it. So my next card, I think as we are like investigating the scientist's like workstation, right? Like we're kind of investigating, what was going on, where they were, and retracing their steps, we find evidence of we find like evidence of communications between them and their partner that suggests that like they had lunch plans, right? Like they you know, over the days prior and the weeks prior, like they've met for lunch, they've met for dinners, like they're partners. They're in a romantic relationship, but what stands out is that in those communications, it's clear that like some of almost in a like thrown away kind of way that the scientists had provided their partner with personal access codes, and I'm putting that on their opportunity.
Yeah, and I think giving personal access codes is like a deeply intimate thing. Like this is indicative of at least the scientists felt that this is a very serious relationship.
Yeah.
Love it. All right, let's see. I'm gonna say that the okay. So I think we're starting now also to sort of just, you know, as investigators, we're kind of informally canvassing folks who may have encountered the scientist on their like last day or two, and we discovered that they had this massive, like, absolute blowout fight with their old mentor, the botanist, and the details of exactly why seem to be a little bit unclear. But I think their mentor really was, you know, some of it at least tied to the botanist hoping that the scientist would put their skills and all their creativity toward something that was more directly benefiting the world or advancing human knowledge than working on this sort of pleasure station. So it might have been that seems like an argument as we talk around that they had a couple times before, but for whatever reason, a reason that we haven't figured out yet, perhaps, this was a particularly big blowout that, you know, happened in an atrium that like a bunch of people saw, and they, the two of them, the scientist and the botanist, just really got into it, sort of forgetting that they were in a somewhat public place, and so something clearly had gone on there, and it's probably worth us digging into further.
And I think that like we've done a fair amount of digging to find all of our clues so far, right? Like we have been piecing things together, and I think our next clue kind of like ironically slaps us in the face a little bit, because like as we are digging like a big video announcement by the people that run the resort, the vacation station, which is a phrase that you dropped out that I think is the proper name of the resort that we're on, because vacation station is very funny. They do like a big video announcement of like they are announcing the big successful rollout of invisibility tech, and specifically like it has been engineered by one of the station's top engineers, and it is going to be used to like fully to make the park even more immersive and make vacation station even more immersive by like rendering invisible, so that like when you're in the fantasy space, everything you're seeing is in the fantasy space, so that like, you know, mechanics can be fully invisible, repairing rides, and, you know, like the cleaning staff are fully invisible, and it is a little bit horrific. A little
dehumanizing.
A little bit more, yeah, a little bit. But like, I think as we're watching this video announcement, like, it clicks, like it clicks in our head. Hey, isn't that the scientist's relative that was like the head engineer on this invisibility tech?
Yeah, totally. And you know, obviously one of the first things we did after the murder was like try and review the cameras, and yeah, I think there's, you know, the camera coverage in the station isn't amazing, and you know, maybe someone could have gone through the gaps, but they easily, if they were using invisibility tech, could have just gone, you know, straight through, quick and easy path. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right, so we have made our first pass through. Every character now has one bit of evidence against them, which means it is time for us to eliminate one suspect. So I'm going to randomly flip over one of the innocence and guilt chips, and we're going to see which one's eliminated, and then we're going to have to figure out why.
Okay.
Or how. All right, so it is the professor. So we know that the professor is innocent. And do you want to take this? Do you have any ideas? Otherwise, I can come up with one. We can talk it through.
I don't know. Do you have thoughts?
Let's see. So we know they're the rival, and we know they had this access via the AI assistant. I'm going to say maybe what we find So I think what we do is we immediately reach out to some of our own academic colleagues who happen to also have access to the AI assistant, and we ask them to both go through the logs and see if any of the safety code has been overwritten. Because again, like if the professor was using the AI assistant tech to kill the scientist, there were like multiple safeguards that would have to be overwritten. And so we get some of our friends to do like a quick audit of the code and the change logs, and they see not only no evidence of tampering, but they also see that the professor had been like busy altering some other part of the code at the time. They were just like deep in a like really focused work session with a few other academics who were, can corroborate that the professor was like busy during this time.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that.
Cool. Okay, so we're ready to move on to the next round. And so this is how the rest of the game will play out.
Yeah.
So again, now everyone will have to get a second bit of evidence before we move on to the next round, and no more playing evidence cards on the professor.
Got it.
All right. Over to you.
All right. I think as we are doing our investigation, and probably as we're watching that video announcement, we see somebody on camera that like in the crowd, right? Because they're doing this in that sort of they're rolling out the invisibility tech in this sort of Apple iPod, Google announcement of like, oh, we're rolling out this new piece of tech. Here's our CEO standing in a circle of people who are going to ooh and ah and clap. And I think somebody catches our eye, right? Somebody catches our eye, and it is their partner, the scientist partner, this criminal. They have an assistant. They have a fixer. They have a person that handles things, and like they're not affiliated with the station at all, but they are very they are there. And it was kind of a blink if you blink and you'd miss it thing of them seeing them in the crowd and going like, why would they be here? Why would they be here for their partners, ex-partners, siblings, big rollout for a company that they're not associated with? Why is this person here and just smiling and clapping alongside everyone else?
Definitely something strange is up.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's see. I'm going to...
Oh, and I should say I put assistant under the criminal's means for the audience at home.
Yes. All right. I'm going to say that I'm going to reveal a secret for the mercenary employee. So I'm going to say as we're continuing to dig into things, one of our like group of colleague investigators ends up using a little bit of the hack to look at some of how the finance streams were flowing around, and discovers that the mercenary employee has a very substantial like illicit income stream being sent via some weird set of proxies, but still making its way into their accounts. And this isn't payout for past work. It's way too big for that. It's not like a pension from their mercenary time or anything. And it is a somewhat steady stream. And then the night of the scientist's murder, huge boost, like 10x more of any past payout. So we're not sure. Like, there's too many proxies and cryptography for us to figure out who sent this, but something very strange is happening here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the next, as your investigator is going and pulling up like financial records, I think mine is like hanging around the scientist's workstation because something like I've got a hunch and something's not clicking until I finally like look at the various like. I picture they have a cubicle. I picture they have like a very office space cubicle, and it's got news clippings along the walls of the cubicle. And like one of them stands out to me. It's like a framed newspaper of one of their big like bio-organic, they retro engineered like an earth plant that could thrive on the station, and on much smaller, and like on the corner of this newspaper is like a piece of light, is like an announcement of a piece of light refraction tech, like an early predecessor of this invisibility tech by their relative. And, like, as I stare at that for a long time, like, it really kind of clicks, and I'm putting a motive card onto the relative. Like, they have been... As I look at this, I think back on all of the times that they have interacted, and I imagine a great deal of jealousy probably festered there, because this is not the first time that, like, our scientist did something that vastly overshadowed their relative. And, like, there feels like there's jealousy at play there.
Oh yeah, they've just constantly been in the shadow.
Yeah.
That totally. Well, on the subject of motive, I think hold on. Oh, actually, I take that back. Never mind. We already have given them 2. So we have to give something on the botanist. Let's see. All right. This sort of builds on the blow up they had earlier. I'm going to add an opportunity. And I'm going to say that as we're sort of working our way through the scientists' communication logs, we find a message to the botanist that was dated after their big fight, saying, somewhat cryptically, like, we can't keep fighting like this. This needs to stop. And then a like geo pointer toward an experimental, like, new tech development area right next to where the scientist's body was found, but behind locked doors, with an access code to just sort of get through those doors and meet them there, just an hour prior to when their body was discovered.
I love it. So now we are going to pull our next innocence chip.
Yep, and we'll find out what suspect is removed from the investigation. 5. It is not the romantic partner.
That is, I was willing that into the universe because I know exactly how this gets cleared, and so I was begging for 5 to get drawn, and so I'm glad that I was able to power that into existence. I think how that gets cleared, because the big, like, lingering question here, right, is what was the assistant doing here? Why would the scientist's partner have their assistant, their fixer, their, like, problem solver poking around the station? And I think that our answer comes when the assistant comes to confront us. And, like you said, we're not really, like, suspects in this. Like, we but it's become apparent at this point that we've been poking around. And I think that the assistant comes to us to see, and they, like, when they come to us with the question of, like, what have you found? And it becomes apparent that the reason the assistant is on the scene is because the criminal's romantic partner was found dead, and they're trying to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, they're aggressively pursuing this case. They share all of what they found with us so far, and it's really clear they're deeply affected.
And I like that, especially because as we go into the next round, it opens up the possibility for, like, some of the cards that we found to not be the ones that the 2 of us found, but that we get from the assistant as all of us are kind of working this case together under the radar and away from any sort of official investigation.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So with that, I'll immediately jump in and say that the assistant and the criminal they come to us and say, hey, look, the assistant's been shadowing the engineer, the relative, and they shadowed them up to a point where they couldn't follow them any longer because the relative disappeared into the ventilation shafts. And the station has all of these little, like, half floors and ventilation shafts in between the different floors that are mostly used by robots to carry things around, although some engineers have access to it too. And it turns out that the engineer relative had like full all access, which made it so that they could easily pop into to pretty much wherever the scientist happened to be.
And, you know, tying that back into the other cards in play, like, that type of thing, both robots flying through the shafts to do repairs, as well as, like, employees going in and out, is exactly the kind of thing that Vacation Station has announced that the invisibility tech is there for, to make sure that nobody sees that sort of thing. So it maps out perfectly to, like, why they would have that access, and, like, why nobody would have reported it previously. I like that.
Totally.
There's some juice there. All right, let me look at my cards and see what I got. Okay, something's cooking here. I'm going to put a motive card, I'm going to put a motive card onto our mercenary employee. I'm putting the motive of justice onto our mercenary employee. I think as we are digging through records, we find that like our mercenary employee who had been like, taking paydays on the sly, we find that they had like reported things to their higher ups, and that like there was an issue with like some of the plant life. Like there was an issue with something had gone wrong with the plant life, and this employee had announced it, or had like revealed it and reported it. And like, so there's two possibilities, and I want to throw it to you, Randy, to see which one you think is juicier. Is it that there is something wrong with the plants, or that there is something lucrative with the plants that money can be made off of? Because I think either way, they reported it and it was buried. So this motive of justice is them feeling like they raised something and it was buried.
Ooh, okay, cool. Yeah, I like this a lot. I think maybe it's that what they realized was that something about these plants, like a part of the plant, has been engineered to be very easily refined to some type of hyper addictive drug, and that it could be that like it was engineered this way so that it could be grown sort of everywhere without anybody sort of. It looks very innocuous, but effectively providing a free source for some drug distribution network. And when they shared this out, it was immediately clamped down, and they were just like, "Yep, we will look into this. Please do not, do any other investigation on your own. We don't want to incur any extra corporate liability." And so unclear how much like was the corporation that's running Vacation Station complicit in this, or do they just not want to be exposed to the liability? It's unclear. But yeah, totally.
I like that. I really like that. That's great.
All right, cool. So our final evidence for this round is going to be on the botanist mentor, and I'm going to say that we've been following them via the sort of the cameras and like keeping and talking to some of their friends and colleagues, and they've been acting a bit dodgy over the past couple months. And as we continue to dig into it, we discover that they've accrued just massive debts. And I think what we discover here is that they were working on some very unorthodox gene splicing into plants, and their funding had been turned down through their normal like legal channels, which is probably some combination of the company that runs the station with maybe some grants, and so they were so fervently believing about this gene slicing that they turned to a criminal organization that financed it at extremely high interest rates, and they have as of yet been unable to make the breakthrough that they wanted and pay back these debts. And it seems that they've been sort of getting threatened by this criminal organization of like, hey, you better find that money somewhere. And so that had all been in the time leading up to the murder. So they had a lot of outside pressure on them. By the way, as we're getting down to the last sets of cards, if you don't happen to have good cards that match, or you're just not inspired, feel free to grab some extra evidence cards.
All right.
So that is our pass through the third round of it, and we now have a chance to eliminate another suspect. So I'm going to flip another one of the chips. And 3. It is not the botanist mentor. Ooh. Okay. How or why do we discover exonerating evidence?
So I'm looking at the two people that we have left, and I'm trying to think, like, if there's either a way that we can clear the botanist mentor, or if there is something that we can apply to the two of our remaining suspects that doesn't fit the botanist mentor.
Ooh.
Thinking this through. I think this is where our assistant comes into play. I think this is where our assistant comes into play in a big way, because our botanist mentor has debts, and I think the piece of the info that we are able to gather as we talk with the criminal's assistant is that at the time of the murder, And the person that they owed debts to was the criminal romantic partner.
Ooh, excellent.
And so they're able to they are ultimately able to give, and as we kind of start to gather this evidence, we have this meeting with the assistant, we lay out all of these facts, and we start to point towards, they had this fight, there were grants that were denied, all of these things are lining up, and the assistant goes like, no, we were meeting with them last week. At the time of the murder, we were with them.
Yeah.
It's like we were meeting with them because we were dunking their head in a toilet to make sure that they got us their money.
Yeah. So easy to strike. Once they check the calendar and the timing, makes total sense. Okay, so we're on to our final round. So each suspect is going to get one final bit of evidence that fills up the row, and then we'll figure out who the actual culprit was. All right, so let me just take a look. I'm going to draw a couple more because I don't have quite enough that match.
Yeah, I'm going to do the same. I drew the entire deck. All right, I think I have one.
All right, go for it.
So I think we're able to put together a story. I think that we follow this mercenary employee and we're able to put together a story. We reconstruct a narrative. There's a missing gap that we're able to put a tack into, which is they find out that there is this scheme to engineer these drugs, and there's that, and then there's a gap between when they get a sudden blast of secret income in their bank account. And I think that what we're able to determine, and I think we look through their I don't even know what you would like shipping records, their logistical records, and we find that there are unmarked shipments of boxes of unmarked materials that they arrived in, which indicates that this employee figured out this scheme. Their attempt to shut it down was rejected by the corporation running Vacation Station in such a way that they said, "Oh, they're in on this." And they made the decision, being a mercenary, to say, "Well, if they're in on this, I'm going to get mine." And so they happen to have a large degree of synth drugs, of this poisonous derived hyper drug that they could probably, and we would have to get an autopsy report to confirm this, since the next card is going to determine our guilty party. We would have to get an autopsy file to prove that the blunt force trauma did not kill our scientist, and that it was a red herring, but it's possible that they just loaded this person with a bunch of drugs, overdosed them, and then dumped the body, making it look like there was an accident.
Right. It could be that the trauma was inflicted after death.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense. Okay, great. I think we have a really strong case against the mercenary, but maybe we will against the engineer too.
Yeah.
So the final bit of evidence for this play is a secret for the engineer relative, and I think we discover that they were having an affair with the professor rival, who we had completely written out of this investigation very early on. That as we're now keeping pretty close tabs on the engineer relative, which is hard to do given that they occasionally don this invisibility tech, we're able to catch some footage of them leaving the professor's housing, and now tying the two of them together is just extra interesting, given we know the animosity between the professor and the scientist, and now we have the jealousy motive of the engineer, that this is especially suspect.
Yeah.
So all right, with that, we now have a full evidence board, and it is time to figure out first who is innocent and then who's guilty, and then we gotta figure out the why and the how of that. So let me flip over one more innocence one first. So it is going to be the mercenary. It is not the mercenary, which means, of course, that it is the engineer who is the guilty party. So we can either, it could be that the same thing the same instance, the same evidence, whatever, indicates that, oh, it wasn't the mercenary, it was the engineer, or it could be two separate things. Do you have anything that immediately jumps out to you as to what is it that tips it off?
I think that what we find that tips us off that the mercenary is innocent is there's still one big question mark. There is still one big question mark that ties into the mercenary story. And I think once we look at that question mark, it starts to point us towards the engineer being guilty. If I may
Yeah.
take the wheel here, because I think some strings are tying together.
I'd love to hear it.
The big question mark is, the mercenary finds this drug trade is happening. They get it shot down and they're like, oh, it's actually a corrupt institution. They say, all right, well then I'm going to get in on it. They get their hands on this plant. They get their hands on a large portion of it, and then they get a massive spike to their income. The missing piece of that puzzle is how they get their hands on a tradable massive amount of this synth drug. And I think that what we're able to piece together is that the scientist was in on it. They had worked to get, the scientist was working with them to they probably helped engineer this plant, right? And they were like, all
Totally.
right, if that's what's going to happen, then we're going to get a huge illicit bump to our pay, and we are going to bounce out of there together.
Makes total sense. And I think that also confirms some of the tension that we observed of okay, they're now suddenly getting this huge hit of income. Why jeopardize that with a murder?
Yeah.
It feels like just keep the things run smoothly. So I think this makes a ton of sense, and it lets us sort of comfortably eliminate the mercenary as a suspect. I have an idea now for what points us directly to the engineer other than process of elimination. So I think there's a lot that bugged us sort of about the crime scene, about the not so great camera angles and footage on it. But I think what we've done is, with some of our other sort of scientist and engineer colleagues, we've been running some enhancement algorithms on the footage we do have. And it's very clear that in some of the footage we have of the scientist's body lying in that atrium in the water feature, something that we had missed the first dozen times we had sort of watched the clips, is that there's very clear splashes of footsteps in the water feature, but no person.
Yeah.
And while the invisibility tech is quite good at optically masking the person, it can't do anything about ripples in water. And so this points us to oh, somebody was clearly wearing the invisibility tech. We look at the logs, and the murder happened before the announcement, and up until the announcement, this tech was extremely tightly controlled. And it's really clear that only the engineer relative could have had access.
I think that the other thing I want to throw out, I think that as we're looking at this, something else clicks that ties together two things that really makes all of this make sense. The day that the mercenary employee gets this illicit bump in their income, the day that they get this massive payout, would have been 2 days before, would have been probably a matter of, we had said that we ran into the announcement of the invisibility tech while early on, almost immediately after we start looking into the investigation, which means that the murder was a day, it was that day or the day before, was immediately before this, which means that the scientist and this mercenary employee were set to get a life-changing payout and bounce off of the station and live out a life of luxury the day that their relative was going to go public with the thing that was finally going to give them one up over their relative.
Yes.
Totally. It was finally going to be the relative, the engineer's time to shine. And by virtue of stumbling into this black market plot, they just happened to once again pull one over on it because, surprise, I never need to work again. So it just was the line too far of, you're not taking this from me this time.
Perfect. I think this neatly ties it all up. So that leaves us to do a couple things. One, how do we confront the culprit and accuse them of their crime?
Oh, that's a good question.
Keeping in mind that we have this ally of the criminal romantic partner who is heavily invested in figuring this out.
That is such a good question.
Okay, I have a start, but I'm not sure where it goes.
Hit me.
So I think that, the first thing that we do, not as sort of scientists who are not involved in the criminal underworld, I think we immediately start going through proper channels, which is the, corporate reporting and like security force. And it becomes very clear that this is immediately going to get hushed up because there's so much of the illegal drugs and other stuff wrapped up in all this that this is going to be a PR nightmare. Not to mention that the person they just had on stage revealing the invisibility tech is at the center of this. So there's like, they're like, oh yes, we take these complaints extremely seriously. We're going to have a very thorough process to match your investigation, and then we'll eventually get to a point where we can take act. Like they just keep sort of rambling on with a bunch of platitudes and word salad, and it becomes very clear to us that no justice will be served if we leave things up to the corporation. I
love that. I think then the way that we deal with this illicitly is we work with the criminal, we work with the romantic partner. We work with the criminal, we work with their assistant. Their assistant, because they were seen during that big reveal, like they have access codes, they have ways of getting in throughout the building, throughout the station. I think that they confront them in their office. They confront the engineer in their office with the idea that they are like setting it up. They kind of present them with the evidence as though it were like a little bit of a blackmail.
Ooh. Oh,
and
or
when we get
those out. Sorry, I'll throw out a slightly different twist on that. Instead of presenting it as blackmail, saying as like we saw what you did. We want access to that for our own criminal purposes, but you're going to give it to us at a discount.
Oh yeah, that's great.
We have this leverage. Yeah,
that's great. And then when they agree to it, they present them the evidence. They're like, hey, we want to work with you. We want to give you an opportunity to work with us to make some money. There's no reason that your only source of profit should come from the corporation. Take your destiny into your own hands. When they finally agree to it and acknowledge, like, yes, I did this and I'm willing to work with you. That's when you and I switch off our invisibility tech.
Yes.
And reveal that we've been in the room the whole time.
Perfect. And we've been in the room the whole time and live streaming to the whole station.
Yeah.
I think that is perfect. And so I think when confronted, when it's clear that we're there, I think, how do they react? They make a run for it at that point, or they resign? Do you have a sense of how the engineer is gonna deal with this confrontation?
I think it's peak. I had said it at the very top of our episode, and I think it's peak Columbo villain of like, you just put up the hands and say I've been beaten, right? Like,
you got me.
It's just that that acknowledgement of this was my downfall. Like I thought I had everything covered, and I've been outplayed.
Perfect. I think that totally hits it. But I think there's also a little bit of like a smirk to them and be like, guess I'm gonna have to go through the system.
Yep.
Wonder how that'll turn out.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm getting put through I'm gonna be subjected to the system. the star engineer that just single-handedly transformed how the station. Oh no, woe is me.
And I think so once they're taken away, because I think as soon as this live stream went out, we had some security forces or whatever sort of show up to the waiting outside to take them away into whatever detention. While the system does its thing. So I think afterwards we're sort of talking about, the two of us as investigators and the criminal and the assistant, we're sort of talking about how it'd be, it'd be a real bummer if they end up getting off just, because the system is so biased. Mm-hmm. And I think the criminal, I'm not sure exactly what they say, but they sort of allude to the fact, like, we're going to let the system do its thing. And if it fails to bring forward justice, well, we in the criminal underworld have our own way of bringing justice about.
And it shouldn't feel as comforting as it does to hear that. Is my closing note.
Yeah. I think earlier, I think there's probably a scene earlier where the criminal didn't even want to get this confession. They just wanted to immediately, throw the engineer out of an airlock, and we talked them down from that. And yeah. Now we're just kind of like, awesome. Well, that is working the case. Thank you so much for playing with me.
This was so much fun. This ruled.
Thank you. It's been really fun for me to just iterate on this and keep porting it to different settings. Maybe sometime in the future we'll get you to make a superhero playset for it.
I was thinking that the entire time. I was like, let me at this, and I will draft this in a day.
Yes. Okay, cool. Well, I think next steps for me on this is one of the next steps is gonna be making it story synthable to make it really easy for folks to just whip up their own playsets. And once I do that, I'll send it your way.
I love it. Oh my god, this was so much fun. Randy, thank you so much for coming on the show and playing this with me. This kicked ass.
Thanks for bringing all of the creativity and brilliance I expect from you. This was a treat for me, and I hope a treat for the listeners too.
So real quick before we wrap up, where can people find you and your work online?
So you can find me online in a number of places, but you can find my games at diegeticgames.com or randylubin.itch.io. I'm also on Twitter at randylubin. You can find StorySynth at storysynth.org. And I just launched a new Discord community for people who are making games to explore the future, serious applications of games. And you can find details of that at foresight.games, FORESIGHT.games. And reach out if you're curious about any and all of that. And of course, look for more information on Working the Case and the broader framework, open source framework behind it, which will hopefully be announced later this year.
Love it. Well, Randy, thank you so much for coming on to the show. That was amazing. This was a great game. And for now, I'm going to throw it over to me in the future so that he can wrap up with the show. Take it, future me.
Thanks, Past Me, and thanks again to Randy for coming onto the show. That game was, I'm blown away at how cool that game was and how tight, like, that play experience was. Like, we did so much cool stuff in such a limited time that, like, I'm just blown away by how much fun I had. Be sure to head to diegeticgames.com/workingthecase to download your own copy of the draft rules playable via playingcards.io for Working the Case, and be sure to follow Randy on Twitter at Randy Lubin. Then while you're on Twitter, follow us at Party of One Pod, like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/Party of One Podcast. Join our Discord community to talk about the episode at bit.ly/Party of One Discord. And if you enjoyed the show, consider leaving us a nice iTunes review, a Podchaser or Spotify review, a Podbean review. They all have reviews. Leave us a review somewhere. You can also give us some love on social media. You can tell a friend about the show. Any of these things do great, and they make me happy, and they help the show do bigger, better, and cooler things. You can also support the show financially at patreon.com/JeffStormer, ko-fi.com/JeffStormer, or go to bit.ly/Party of One merch and pick up a t-shirt, a mug, or a sticker, or all kinds of whatever stuff they have. Then, once you've done all of that, why don't you check out the other podcast that I produce, All My Fantasy Children. It is a character creation, storytelling, and world-building podcast where every week my best friend and I, Aaron Catano Saez, we take a listener-submitted prompt, we spin it into an original fantasy character, and populate a shared universe one story at a time. The show is part of the One Shot Podcast Network, and new episodes can be found weekly-ish at oneshotpodcast.com. Party of One is produced and edited by Jeff Stormer and Jen Frank. All music for the show comes from the song Infinite Lives by Mega Ran featuring the D&D Sluggers, and the Party of One logo is by Evan Rowland. If you'd like to inquire about advertising rates, press coverage, or about guesting on the show, you can email me at partyofonepodcast@gmail.com. And finally, before we wrap things up, one last brief call to action from me in the present. While Americans overwhelmingly support the right of an individual to make their own decisions about abortion, unfortunately, that right is no longer protected everywhere in the United States. The Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade on June 24th. Abortion is a basic healthcare need for the millions of people who can become pregnant. Everyone should have the freedom to decide what's best for themselves and their families, including when it comes to ending a pregnancy. This decision has dire consequences for individual health and safety and could have harsh repercussions for other landmark decisions. Restricting access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, threatens the health and independence of all Americans. Even if you live in a state where abortion rights are upheld, access to safe medical procedures shouldn't be determined by location, and it shouldn't be the privilege of a small few. You can help by donating to local abortion funds. To find out where to donate for each state, visit donationsfораbortion.com. That's the number 4. If you or someone you know needs help, or if you want to get more involved, here are 5 resources. 1. Shout Your Abortion is a campaign to normalize abortion. 2. Don't Ban Equality is a campaign for companies to take a stand against abortion restrictions. 3. Abortion.cafe has information about where to find clinics. 4. PlanCpills.org provides early at-home abortion pills that you can keep in your medicine cabinet. And 5. Choice.crd.co has a collection of these resources and more. I encourage you to speak up, take care, and spread the word. Now then, let's throw it back to me in the past. And that's it. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Remember to fight the force every single day. Remember that self-love and self-care are radical and defiant acts of resistance. And as always, party on, everybody.